I'm sorry, we're having audio and IT technical difficulties with the video and audio, I believe. Who is that? I heard a Cedar Grove or something. We'll proceed with our meeting. We do have a quorum at the table. Thank you very much.
We can hear you.
Can hear me?
Yes,
Very good. Thank you. And who is speaking?
this is Kristen Diot from City of Schenectady.
Noted. Thank you, Kristen. Everyone else can hear us online. Sandy, audio appears to be working, just no video at this time.
Okay, we'll keep
We'll keep plugging along. Thank you so much. And welcome once again. Thank you for your precious time out of your busy schedule to address our regional transportation challenges and opportunities. So our first action item is adoption of our prior meeting minutes of February 2nd. Well, we're still in the, at least mostly virtual mode. It's good to see everyone at the table. We got almost a full house here. Motion to adopt. So February 2nd, please. It was a very thick packet that went out electronically. It's almost a ream of paper with project fact sheets, etc. Motion, please. Mr. Chair. Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you, DOT. All in favor for adopting the minutes, please say aye. Raise your hand. Oh, Andrew Preshik.
Don't recall receiving that package. When was it sent?
It was sent as a calendar Outlook attachment, and once you click accept meeting, it disappeared. I had the same issue. So it was sent last Thursday.
So we talked about this at the February meeting. We're no longer doing mailed packets. The calendar invite plugs into your calendar, the attachments and links to our website with all the meeting materials. So you do have it. If you accepted the meeting invitation for your calendar, it's all sitting in your calendar. So it's just not a traditional email anymore.
So you just switched the cost of paper from me to you, or you to me?
No, you know what it really is, and Steve can attest to it, to this.
Correct.
You know, we would mail something here on a Wednesday. Steve's airport is right there. He
Around
would
the
get it
corner.
before the meeting. So
Take 2
the
weeks
mail
for
is
the mail.
unreliable, so we're
Right.
gonna have to go electronic.
No, it's fine.
So it's gonna be a little bit of a learning curve. So, but yeah, expect to see a calendar invite for the meeting, and it's gonna contain the packet.
Yeah, I was able to get the
information.
agenda. There's some other things, but that particular package, that's what.
So this is what it looks like. That's
Yeah, there were a bunch of
the
links.
calendar invite.
When you print it double-sided, it is almost a ream. Apologies for that, but
It's a little bit of an
information is our
adjustment.
wealth.
So
Knowledge is
many
power.
things.
This is our wealth. So
Way to keep going.
thank you for your attention, and we continue to progress our process. Many advances are noted. Are we ready to vote on the adoption of the minutes? Were there any other corrections? Hopefully, at least some of our quorum did get it in advance via the email and had a chance to review, but it looks very thorough. Kudos to the staff for getting this out almost a week ahead. So motion and second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstaining or opposed? Hearing none. The meeting minutes of February 2nd are hereby officially adopted and will be on the website. Excellent website. Thank you, staff, for keeping that updated. Next item 3B is a nominating subcommittee. Was it audit and finance? Sandy's going to present.
Sure. So as part of CDTC's operations, we have an administrative and finance subcommittee that appoints the at-large town and village members, or nominates them, I should say, to the planning committee and the policy board in February of each year. We bring those nominations to the policy board at its March meeting. And they approve the nominees for the open seats. Related to the planning committee meeting, for whatever reason, the past 5-6 years, we didn't follow our operating procedures. I don't know why, but the operating procedures call for a rotation of the at-large town and village member here at the planning committee level. Peter Comenzo has served in that role for the last 6 or 7, 5, 6, 7 years, however long it's been. So we're reinstating that operating procedure because we have a lot of town and village members who participate here at CDTC, but don't always have the opportunity to be a voting member. So by the rotational process, it allows for each participant each year to be a voting member. So for this coming year, beginning with this meeting, the nominating committee nominated Adam Yagelski from the town of East Greenbush to serve as the voting member. In his absence, we have alternates that would be based off of kind of who's been on the committee as an interested party the longest. So those folks in those folks include Paul Roos from the Village of Manans, Rob Leslie from the town of Bethlehem, Laura Robertson in the town of Niskina, John Scavo in the town of Clifton Park, Don Sapos in the town of Guilderland, Jim Neal in the town of Malta, Andrew, actually Andrew's no longer with the Village of Scotia, my apologies, and Liz Cormos from the Village of Austin Spa. So it would go down in order from there. So with that, we need your approval of Adam Yagelski to serve as the at-large town and village member for this upcoming year.
I'll move that.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any abstaining or opposed? Thank you for your support of the nominating subcommittee as presented by Sandy. Item 3C is next up on the tip. Transportation Improvement Program fiscal constraint, our running story. We, every meeting, take a careful and with attention to table 4 for our 5-year fiscal balancing exercise. So let's pull that table up. We're not able to put it on the screen, Sandy?
Yeah, no. But
Yeah,
Jacob,
I mean,
can you go?
As always, you know, we
I'll
include
try
that
to
table
pull it
4 in the mail out. Really haven't been any big changes since the last time we met. So right now we're currently under program in all 4 years. So we are meeting our fiscal constraint.
So within less than 5% each year going forward, showing fiscal balancing and
Correct.
good management on our finances. Federal highways, attention on this, any correspondence or any comments?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying this is an item of FHWA concern, and we put due diligence and good faith attention on every meeting. You're satisfied with our efforts?
Yes, I mean, so far I am.
Thank you.
I do check it from time to time.
Appreciate it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the
It's
spot.
okay.
We put a lot of effort on this item. So is this a voting item, Sandy, without the update to the thing?
No, this is just for information before we take any action on any tip amendments.
Very good. Very
And
good.
I'm pulling it up right now. just
Table
for
4, we've
members to get over.
which I do recall we're well less than 5%. There you go. Table 4 is on the screen. Anyone online, you should be able to pull it with the advanced agenda. Table 4 is key.
Sorry, the print is so small. As you can see, we're under-programmed in 2021, under-programmed in 21, 22, 31% under-programmed in 22, 23, and 12%. So essentially, we're under-programmed for the remainder of the current TIP.
There will be some projects that will help us
Absolutely.
balance, and there are many variables in play, obviously, oil prices, asphalt prices, many items of variance that could affect ongoing actual cash management through the transportation program. So this is for information only. We'll move into item 4, formal action items. 4A is the 2022-23 CDTC and Regional Planning Commission Technical Assistance Program, the TAP. Mark Castiglione is with us from Regional Planning. Mark,
Sure.
thank you.
We've been advised not to call it the TAP so that we don't confuse it with other programs. So we'll call it the Technical Assistance Program because we are in a pool of acronyms. But this program has been very successful since its initial implementation, I believe in 2018. The agencies have advanced projects and assisted communities at this point totaling more than $100,000 worth of effort, combined effort between the two agencies, benefiting communities in the region. We've worked on projects from comprehensive planning to food access to trail development work. And we look forward to continuing this work, providing what we think is some foundational technical assistance to communities to help them do bigger and better things with the things that we can help them with in the beginning.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark on the technical assistance program? Apologize if I used
It's
the
okay.
acronym.
I wanted to use TAP.
Tap two.
I wanted to use TAPE. There's a whole bunch of acronyms here.
If I can say, as a recipient of one of those, it was extremely beneficial to a small village like us to have them do the existing conditions for us.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments? There's nothing to vote on this item. Is it
We have to approve that,
Approve
to release
continuance.
the solicitation.
release the solicitation for technical assistance program? Motion to release the solicitation, please. By Chris.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? Item 4A is hereby adopted. Thank you. Well, item 4B is the 2019 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. DOT will present. Bob Rice is with us.
Yeah.
Greg's going to cover this item.
So this is the long-running story of the Glen Ridge Road under, well, overheight vehicles that continue to strike the railroad bridge, and our efforts to try to mitigate that, reduce the occurrences. You know, we've been over time implementing various strategies of better paint markings, better signs. None of it has significantly reduced the hits yet. So our next best attempt at this, which is probably kind of the last and largest effort we could do to catch the trucks before they hit the bridge, is to put in a turnaround area immediately prior to the bridge, along with basically a laser system that detects an overheight bridge and will create a series of VMS boards that will flash at the truck and tell it to stop, pull over, and turn around. It looks like the configuration is such that there'll be a turnaround that the truck can utilize without assistance. But if they do need assistance, they can call police for traffic control so they can make the U-turn successfully and get out of the area. In other parts of the state, they've seen reductions north of 90% in the bridge hits. So you're never gonna stop them all, but if we can get rid of 90% of the strikes, I think that's a big win.
What have they done with state roads that are in, say, denser village, city populations? How do you set up how do you do a turnaround? Say a residential neighborhood, where it may be.
I think there you just tell the truck to pull over and call for police to back them out. It's the only option. If you,
I think on some other ones, you would try to get to it before they got to that decision point, though, somewhere there. Others downstate, those flashers come up before that there's somewhere else for them to turn before they got to it.
the Parkway, they get them off an exit, get off exit now, divert them before.
I mean, this is a pretty high profile situation we hear about too frequently. The other component that's sort of going on is the advocacy to get the vertical clearance things added to the commercially available GPS sort of things. You're all seeing our car, the screens, they know all the data when the speed limit changes or whatnot. But as of now, it's only the commercial product, the upcharged ones that have that vertical clearance data. So sort of, any forum to push for that you may be part of, the DOT strongly advocating for that to be generic, that on all our phones, that sort of vertical info will come up as well. No matter how many signs we put up, they still seem to be hitting these bridges, unfortunately.
Well, there's one in the village, going to work every day, see it, and there's a bridge, D&H is noted with 12-foot something, and yet the homeowner to the left, or the one side has two signs up saying actual 13 something.
Oh,
So you're driving and say, what do you, it has nothing to do with your, this, rail over
Saw that one, that's
a local
interesting.
street.
Yeah, that's an entrance to the village. We'd like them to add also, which are no truck routes, because we get them when they can't, they notice the bridge, they take a right and go down our village streets and really eating up the pavement.
It comes up pretty frequently. Generally we stay away from, they're tax-paying commercial entities that if it's open in a public road, that the commercial vehicle has the right to use it. You go, well, people don't want tractor trailers, but the Amazon delivery folks are fine. I need those to come into the neighborhood. And so we sort of stay out of it. There are options where, other states are more progressive in truck routes and alternate routes and sort of things. They may have been easier to implement years ago than New York starting down that sort of path now. But, we sort of treat them as these circumstances come up to try to, what are the palette of options and what can we do?
Wait, is there a pattern to the crashes there? Are people using GPS? Is that?
Half of the bridge hits are me or you that can rent a rider truck and it's too tall, and a rookie driver like without a CDL license, it's not in our mind for the driver. So we can rent a truck and drive into it if we want. Don't recommend it, but but then the
Generally not the established carriers that
Yeah.
are hitting it. It's freelancers or
Owner
rider
operators.
trucks
the other half,
using information just off their phone.
There is a complaint.
And language barriers is sometimes an issue.
Isn't there a federal complaint place where you can put complaints about trucks to the feds, actually?
White House.
To the White House?
WhiteHouse.gov.
Thank
I
you,
don't
Michael.
know.
All right.
Greg,
Um,
total project, $1.8 million project.
$1.8 million project. It is being funded off the top. The main office there's a few more of these statewide that they're trying to fund. So this is one of them that Multnomah County gets core funds.
Are there gonna be, is it both sides of the bridge or just I know most of it happens on the one side, but are you doing it both sides?
We are doing it both sides. On the Glenville side, if they're coming from Glenville, it will divert them down a side road to come back out to 50. And I just hope they don't keep trying again.
Well, there's already a roundabout on that side, right?
They're gonna catch them after the roundabout and turn them left.
Okay.
There's one final road right before the bridge that they can make it out to Route 50.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, at the airport, we use a precautionary bar and added yellow continuous flashing lights on the ramp entrance to our garage, which has a limited height. I believe it's about 11. They still hit that pre-bar, so we keep spare bars. Any other comments? Ready to vote on this item? B1 for the off the top 1.8 to address the safety concern. Ready to vote? Motion, please. That's for Chris. Steve Feeney, second. Thank you very much, Steve. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much for your support. And item B2 is Albany 608 RT 2102 trail restoration improvements at Edmund Niles Hike Preserve, of Rensselaerville, or the tip of the Appalachian Mountains in Albany County, OPRHP, and is this Greg or Jacob? Greg?
Either or, I can speak to it.
Yeah.
So this is, as Steve mentioned, a recreational trails project from the New York State Office of Parks. So this doesn't require any MPO action, but we show it on the tip for informational purposes. It's about kind of all we know about the project, but it's $250,000 just generic federal aid that we put in the current fiscal year. So no action needed.
Just to add a little more to that, these projects are added as a block of funds at the state level through the statewide transportation improvement program. And due to the timing and just to keep things simple for everybody, that's why they don't require sort of MPO approval in that manner. There was an agreement done between the MPOs and the state DOT to add them directly to the STIP, given its Office of Parks and Rec program. So
Do we know if this is for like trail rehab or the interpretive center or?
It's trail rehabilitation.
And to that point, is that a tip category?
So the Rec Trails program is managed by the Office of Parks and Recreation. It's actually a separate funding program in federal law. The state of New York has opted to operate and program those funds through the State Parks Department. rather than through DOT or one of the other state agencies. It's a relatively small program. I think statewide, we're talking maybe in the 10, 20, $30 million range.
Yeah, so
2 million a year.
2 million a year, thank you, Maria. It's a small program and it's really intended for smaller trail projects, again, recreationally focused.
100, 200.
2 million a year per.
big number.
Yes.
But it's open though for, I mean, I'd say Zim Smith, I can come in and start looking for, restoration.
Yeah, it's a trail on the scale of a Zim Smith, which I think you're looking for maybe $5, $6, $7 million.
That's
as Maria
5
said.
years.
That's 5 years worth of funding, the entire state. It's not a very large funding program. And again, it's really intended for sort of spot recreational level improvements, yeah. And it's also
Not correct,
managed.
like groomers a lot of times.
There's some motorized,
Yeah.
you can do motorized, we've gotten it for snowmobile stuff, we've gotten it for the bike trail too, with a small,
Yeah.
small trail,
I know trail groomers is a big category.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the way you apply for those funds, it's done through the state's consolidated funding application process. So that's how you would access that program.
Thanks.
Good to know. 4 million, very important to our quality of life and recreational fitness. Next item up is 4B to C. Charlie is the TIP program update with Sandy.
Yes.
2027, we've got candidate lists and that's.
So I'll start, first of all, for those listening in, I apologize, our camera is not working in the room. Hopefully you hear me okay. To start off the discussion on the 2022-2027 TIP update, we do have a PowerPoint. Jen, if you can hear me and you could share your screen with the PowerPoint, great. So Jen's going to assist me from our secret room in the other office. For those of you here in the room, those listening in from outside should be seeing Jen's screen with the PowerPoint presentation. So, a lot has happened in the last 6 months. We're going to walk through today where we're at, what to expect quickly here in the next month or two, and what our schedule is moving forward. So next slide. So again, for those listening in, if you're not familiar with CDTC, because I know there's some folks that might not be familiar with us, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Capital Region. We represent the counties of Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady, with the exception of the town of Monroe and the village of South Glens Falls, which are in neighboring MPO up at the Adirondack Glens Falls Transportation Council. Our primary purpose is to serve as a forum for transportation policy and project programming. We allocate federal transportation funds to planning activities and projects. And our member agencies include everyone from the New York State Department of Transportation, regional entities like CDTA, CDRPC, the 4 counties, and our cities, all 8 cities in the region, as well as a town and village representative and the town of Colony as a permanent member. Next slide. So what we're here for today is to talk about the Transportation Improvement Program. And just as a reminder of what that is for those listening in, it's our 5-year capital program of projects where we allocate federal transportation funds. The projects in the program have to reflect our long-range metropolitan transportation plan, currently known as Envisions. We use the goals and objectives, the recommendations of our regional plan to help program projects and identify the methods by which we evaluate projects for inclusion in the Transportation Improvement Program, so that connections between the plan and the capital program, which implements the plan, is a really key piece of what we do here at CDTC. In addition, we also have to achieve, they're not so new now, but federal and regional performance targets. So within federal legislation, there's a number of federal performance goals ranging from things like improving our safety of the transportation system, the reliability of the transportation system, and managing the assets such as pavement condition and bridge conditions. So these goals are another tool that we use to help program projects in the transportation improvement program. Next slide. So since we began this process all the way back in September of 2021, it's been a while. I know it's been a long haul. It's really been the longest timeline we've ever had here at CDTC in building a new transportation improvement program. But we held the application process in September and October. Proposals were due on December 3rd. We spent December and most of January evaluating all of the projects. We also shared our completed evaluations with the sponsors for feedback and review, comments. We made some edits to each project as needed at that point. And we've been kind of waiting, frankly, for a while. We went through our March policy board meeting, which really in my 23 years here was the first time we really couldn't share much with the policy board at its March meeting on the development of the TIP. But one of the things that the policy board did do is they acted to allow you folks to build the TIP, and they request that before it goes to the public that they get 24 hours to review the work you folks have done here, and then we will release it to the public for public review. And that's just to ensure that our policy board members understand what is in the program, what projects were identified as priorities, and allow them an opportunity to have any comment before we hit the public realm. Just within the last 2 weeks, we received from the New York State Department of Transportation the guidance document and our funding allocations, which we'll review in detail today. Moving forward, we hope to spend the months of April and May here programming the TIP. We also have to do our air quality conformity analysis and determination, and our public review. We hope to have a virtual workshop of some type and develop a more robust public participation program, probably during the month of May. And then in the month of June, we will bring a final draft TIP to our policy board to review. The state gave us an extra 2 weeks to complete this exercise because of the timing and how things have been delayed this year. So we will be shifting some timing of some of our meetings around, and I'll speak to that as we move forward. Sorry, next slide. I'm hitting forward as if I'm still running the PowerPoint. So if you attended our December policy board meeting, Ron Epstein from the New York State Department of Transportation was here, and he presented on what was then the estimates that they thought they would be getting from the new federal transportation bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. So you'll hear me use the term bill and bill interchangeably. Sometimes it's 2 L's and sometimes it's 1 L. So just keep that in mind. I just wanted to walk through a couple of highlights. First of all, the estimated increase to New York State as a result of the new federal law at the time was estimated to be 52% or $4.6 billion. That is statewide, and that's all federal aid programs. I know this slide is hard to read, and I don't expect you to read it, but this slide shows all of the different funding programs available in the bipartisan infrastructure law that are formula driven. There's a lot of discretionary programs that aren't shown here. Distinction in terms of language, formula programs are those that the state of New York can take and allocate throughout the state as they see fit. They are the stewards of the federal transportation funding, and therefore they can allocate these programs as they see fit. There's only one primary program that the MPO by law gets access to based on the population of our region, and that's the Service Transportation Program, large urban funding. We'll talk about that in later slides. The 52% increase is compared to what was in the FAST Act, the previous authorization. You'll notice there's a time gap because there was a number of continuing resolutions between the FAST Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So this is the first time in a number of years we've had sort of a consistent amount of funding for transportation in New York State. Next slide. Whoop. Can you go back? Back one more. Thank you. Right there. So we addressed the Metropolitan Planning program in our Unified Planning Work Program last month. So this program is really dedicated to our planning work. Some of the other programs that we're not going to be, we're not familiar with because the state hasn't issued guidance yet, and I think they haven't issued guidance yet because the federal government hasn't issued guidance yet, are the new programs like the Carbon Reduction Program and what's called the Protect Program, which is a kind of a coastal resiliency program. So some of those funding sources are not available to all of us yet. So they are not going to be part of our TIP update at this moment in time. Next slide. So the three that I've circled here, the National Highway Performance Program, the Surface Transportation Program, and the Highway Safety Improvement Program really represent the core programs that we fund here collaboratively with all of you. They're sub-allocated to us from the state DOT. It allows us to build a local program as well as a state preservation program. But these are really the kind of the three primary fund sources in the law. The National Highway Performance Program actually got a pretty significant boost in the bipartisan infrastructure law. The Surface Transportation Program has some new eligibilities and some additional resources were also added to the safety program due to the national emphasis on safety. Next slide. So to simplify this and to have it in a format that the folks here in the room and those listening in can kind of more easily understand it. These are the three core programs, the NHPP, the SDP, and the HSIP. And as you can see on the slide, we compared the 2022 to 2027 funding allocated in the bipartisan infrastructure law to New York State and compared that to the FAST Act funding. The percentages by at the end, the percent change is really what to pay attention to. So for our purposes in New York State as a whole, these three fund sources increased 26.6%. Again, there's a lot of additional new funding programs in the law that we're not going to be programming at this time. They may come in future solicitations, they may be future sub-allocations to CDTC. We really don't know. But these are the fund sources that we're most aware of and we'll be working through programming in the current Transportation Improvement Program update. Next slide. So as I said a little earlier, we received our guidance document from the department at the end of March. And I wanted to just point out a couple of things that the document specifically said. At the beginning, I said the overall increase to New York, all fund sources was about a little over 4.6 billion or 52% of what the FAST Act authorized. The guidance document, and I'm highlighting the 4.6 billion here, specifically says that most of that increase is in the two key programs, the National Highway Performance Program, which I mentioned, and a new supplemental Extraordinary Bridge Formula Program, which is a program that will ultimately be managed by the state, but we don't know yet how that's going to be managed or how that's going to be rolled out. But that's where the largest increase in dollars went for New York State. Next slide. The other interesting piece that was in the guidance document is this $4.2 billion intended to serve to reconnect communities severed by interstate or other high volume roadway construction in the 50s and 60s. The guidance specifically notes these four projects in the city of Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and New York City as being allocated 4.2 billion of federal, possibly state resources, but largely federal, to construct these four specific projects. So going back to that increase, when we're thinking about what's happening statewide, the guidance document specifically says that these four projects are priorities for the state. Next slide.
Sandy,
Yep.
On the previous slide.
Yep.
What does the extraordinary mean relative to the bridge funding?
I think that has yet to be defined. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, program guidance isn't out on that yet.
Yeah. So, question, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Oh, you were-
I was wondering, Albany didn't make the list of highway dividing.
So, this, I'll start with the Syracuse story because that's the one I'm most familiar with. And I assume the other three are in the same position. They've already gone through the federal environmental review process or pretty close to it, whereas the Albany project is not. So they were really in a position to get construction funding allocated. And I-81, if you've been, following in the news, is really at that key point. So I think, it's not to say that there's not interest, but in terms of where those projects were at in the process, they were sort of in the quote, ready to go stage. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, to supplement what Sandy said, in the governor's state of the state, there was a longer list of large scale candidate projects, including the Livingston Ave Bridge. But like Sandy's saying, that these four are much closer to an environmental determination, which means they can be built and are getting closer to a construction phase. The idea to fund them out of core funds as opposed to subsequent discretionary programs. Obviously, DOT and the state as a whole would like to get as much discretionary program as we can bring available, which would free up as much core funding for sort of the everyday sort of work that needs to get done. But the way that it stands within the guidance as they are right now, they're looking to fund those out of the core fund source.
Do they also have a high degree of environmental justice impact?
Certainly the I-81 project does. I know the Cross Bronx Expressway project does. The inner loop in Rochester project, I'm not as familiar with. I don't know, Maria, if you can speak to that. I'm not as familiar with the one in Buffalo, so.
Kensington, I mean, the same thing. It's a depressed, sort of reconnecting the neighborhoods and the depressed arterial with bridges going over.
Just using the 1950s as a cutoff point. I mean, it's when segregation started occurring in those are large municipalities, so the impact is probably greater in addition to the shovel readiness.
Right.
And the language in the new bill very specifically is regarding that community connectivity. It does not emphasize additional capacity.
Sandy, is this an example of where, we do things ahead of time, do design earlier on regionally significant projects, do design earlier, environmentally earlier, we'd be eligible for this in the sense that, I just think for the group, this is, to me, shows a great example, right, of if we collectively found the money, and I don't know who does this, but progress these projects much earlier, when these funding opportunities come around, we can say, listen, they're shovel ready and we're eligible. I think this is probably going to come up with more of the funding that comes out of the new transportation infrastructure bill. We got to make sure we're prepared so then we're more competitive, so the money comes to the capital region, doesn't go to other parts of the country or other parts of the state.
Right. And we've been discussing this, and you're right, and CDTA is another great example of, using the design process to get to a certain point to then be able to apply for these federal discretionary programs and be successful that way. Because, as I continue the story here, you'll see why it will be more challenging, at least the way things are set up in this moment in time, to program things locally here through our TIP resources. So, but yes, point taken.
And the competitive solicitation programs that we've seen to this point, they usually have the caveat of a shovel in the ground within 18 months of the award. So for anything that's of a large scale, your environmental determination, you need to be well down that path. We're hoping to find out the Livingston Ave to have the record of decision in the spring, which would make that more competitive for some of the discretionary programs. So Russ and I were talking about this earlier. As we talk about candidate projects, certainly the discussion of maybe some of the larger ones, at least getting to a design approval so they become eligible for the size of the bump in the transportation bill related to the discretionary programs. The best that we collectively could be in a position to have solid candidates is certainly the way that the planning front is sort of changing to that sort of element.
The elimination of the 10-year rule assists in that strategy too. So you don't have to be afraid of starting a project with a 10-year clock running.
Essentially now we need to do a reevaluation before we advertise a project about the environmental determination, regardless of it. So it's sort of eliminated that need of the shelf life of a design report. You sort of need to do another evaluation as you get closer to it anyway. So it's good. The different opinions about discretionary programs versus formula, going right to the state, but it certainly is the nature of these, and being ready for construction is an emphasis point, and the discretionary programs push us all to have projects ready to go. As you see, we have big core funded stuff. We have a big rollover that goes from the last tip into the current tip. And here with the discretionary stuff, the clock is ticking much more loudly than the core programs.
Is the discretionary pot, is that used up by those 4 projects in this bill? Or is there?
But see, those are core funded, the way that it's programmed right now. Yeah.
So those are coming out of the going back to the NHPP, HSIP, and STP. They're going to take that. So remember that increase of 52%, reduce it right away.
And we have not seen the full spectrum of the discretionary programs that are yet to come out of the new federal bill. I think only 3 or 4, and I've heard upwards of 40 new programs being proposed.
And that's a USDOT.
USDOT project. And some of those may be distributed, like Sandy was saying, some of those may be, this is way easier to just do it formula by lane miles in a particular state. Here you go, you do good work.
Yeah.
As opposed to the application business for 40 more discretionary programs will present its own challenges.
It's actually 66.
See?
66. A lot of programs.
Challenges and opportunities.
Yeah.
No, that's great discussion. Thanks for all the good questions. So let's bring it down to the CDTC table. And what this is going to mean for us. So as part of the programming guidance we received, we also received preliminary planning targets. You'll hear me use that term, but basically these are our funding allocations, if you will, the budget that we're going to be using for these 3 core funding programs. These planning targets are divided amongst the 11 DOT regions in the state. There's also a statewide sum that comes off the top for statewide significant projects. And then there's some funds that are not allocated, as we said, some of the core funding programs like the carbon reduction program and these other types of programs that just haven't been addressed yet, and other program types like the transportation alternative programs, which is handled through a different kind of solicitation process. So those are not counted in these planning targets. The shares of the state and federal fundings have not yet been adjusted because of where we're at with the New York State budget. We thought as of today we would have a New York State budget, but as you all know, we don't. So there's some remembering that all of the federal these are reimbursement programs. The state of New York still has to front the money to construct, which means the state budget has to authorize the funding to front the money, and then we can divide up what's available in the state budget versus the federal funding. It's all kind of intertwined anyway. So unfortunately today we're probably, we're not going to start programming projects today. Once the state budget is adopted, we'll have more information about some of those details, and then we'll be able to start the programming at our next meeting. Also in the program instructions or the guidance document, I just wanted to remind folks, this came up in past tip updates, but for those of you who are new, the region, meaning the NISDOT Region 1 folks, have a mandate for a preservation target. That's a dollar-based target. It's for the state-owned roads only. But we have to at least consider their target in the programming of the projects in order to keep preservation first goal for the state moving forward. For the locals, for all of you who local candidate projects, there is no preservation target. So we can do more at your pleasure in terms of the beyond preservation type project funding. So I just wanted to point that out.
The definition of preservation, what does that mean?
You want to take that one, Bob? How would you define it?
By category, there's bridge. There's all these rules, but basically bridge preservation, pavement preservation, a lot of other things count for preservation, restripping the road, transportation management center.
Okay.
Basically putting back the basics that are there that need replacing,
Okay.
need repaired.
We, if you recall, and you can still find it on our website, we worked going way back on sort of developing definitions for the purposes of the TIP. So for example, if you're proposing a repaving project in your community, and you wanted to replace a few sidewalk slabs, that's okay if it's no more than 500 feet of sidewalk. If you're looking to do like a wholesale replacement of a sidewalk, then it would move to a beyond preservation. So we provided some context upfront so that folks understood the distinctions.
On the bridge side, even a bridge replacement is considered beyond preservation. So even if we're proposing it, if we propose it at this table, it has already been approved by our statewide asset teams. Greg or I do not have the discretion to propose anything that's not a preservation project to start. So sometimes when the scopes, when we actually do get into the individual project discussions, sometimes it plays into it because the scope of work that a municipality asks for is generally very different than the things that we're
Up to
putting on the table.
50% of replacing the bridge maybe is preservation, and beyond that is
It doesn't, what a rehabilitation contract would be, that we're generally driven by what the cost of a rehabilitation would be. At some point, you're just spending good money after bad, and it should be a replacement instead, just like anything.
This is not, when you were saying that DOT's monies, there's not any, there's a dollar amount, but not, so we're not going back to 2 or 3 updates ago or so when we dealt with 83% off the top.
No, they don't. They instead of mandating for all federal aid projects, they only mandate it for DOT. They set a threshold that DOT must spend on preservation, and then the rest is.
So there is an effect to funding availability for the project. So
Yes. Strategically, we try to meet the minimum to maximize what's left.
no, the department's been good in that, I'll say conciliatory. In planning what state projects are going to be done and what's taken and what's left, that type of a thing. But I'm looking in my mind, I'm trying to figure, okay, so out of that whole pot, DOT's got stuff, the remainder is left for other local. What about fund sources? Is there anything hit hardest by DOT's use of monies?
We probably, hang on to that question. I think when you see what the role and impact is and what our CDTC allocation is, you'll have a better understanding of our starting point. And then we can kind of come back to your question. Hang on to that one. Any other questions?
I'll tell you, I'll just raise my hand and I won't repeat it verbally.
I will remember your question. Thanks, Mike.
I mean, it's an important point. Like, I think in general, by any metric, the state, the federal aid system at DOT had 75% of it or so, right? And generally our ask, and of course it looks like a big number at the table, but we're generally asking in the mid-60s somewhere for the piece of what's available. So it always makes for a lively discussion, but I think by any outside observance that we try, and it'll go into the fund source discussion, but that we try to maintain a healthy local system investment in Region 1, even as compared to other upstate upstate region.
But I'm looking at our sheets and I look at, preservation and it's dominated by DOT projects.
Yeah.
So just a couple Saratoga, I feel like I'm sandwiched.
But, that's actually a good thing because, maybe a Saratoga County project gets funded to help the region as a whole meet a preservation target. So, it's not a bad thing to have preservation projects from the locals. In fact, that's encouraged. We would like to actually have seen more come from the local governments, but that's not the mix of projects we got, and that's okay. But, that'll be a topic for a future conversation. Next slide, Jen, please. So let me move this little window for folks here in the room. So remembering that Region 1 encompasses 8 counties, the figures that you're seeing on the board and on your screen represent the fund sources. The Surface Transportation Program actually has 3 specific kind of subcategories within it. A flexible fund source, which is just as it sounds, really the most flexible of all the federal fund sources that we can use on pretty much anything. The Surface Transportation Urban, the URB fund source, is what we call our large urban. That's the one that I mentioned at the beginning, is a population-based number that CDTC receives as a result of being what we call a large urban area. So the Albany Schenectady urbanized area gets a specific allocation of urban funds. And the STP OFF represents the off-system bridge program. This is a smaller fund source, as you can see by dollar value, but it's meant to fund local bridges that are off the state highway system. There are other programs now in the state of New York, as you all know, Bridge New York, perhaps this future bridge program for extraordinary bridges that could also fund local bridges. But there is some small set aside within the STP fund source for off-system bridges. And then the HSIP program is our safety program. So that's a fund source specific to types of projects that reduce fatal or severe injury crashes. It's a data-driven program, so it's a tricky fund source to use, but it's a significant resource if you have a location with crash history. And again, just going to the NHPP fund source is really dedicated to projects on the national highway system. That includes the interstate system, the major arterials in the region, like a Central Avenue, Route 5, and all the, not all of the, I believe a good number of the bridges in the state of New York as well.
Sandy,
Yeah.
the meeting mailer is where I pulled my stuff from. This chart doesn't match with that chart.
Yep.
Is
Things
so
have
this-
changed since the mail out.
All right, so did you send something after with these updated numbers or?
Yeah, and this is 8 counties. The one that was in the mail out, I believe, was just for CDTC.
So there is an email that I missed there.
No, we just put this together within this last 2 days.
So this is the 8 counties?
Yes.
And then there's a CDC sub-allocation that I'm
We're
sure is
gonna
coming.
get to next. I just wanted to give you guys the context for how we got to where we're gonna be at the end. So for all of Region 1, the whole 8 counties, which includes our 4, the 2 up in the Adirondack Glens Falls Transportation Council, and 2 rural counties, subtotal of all of those fund sources is about $594 million over the 5-year period. Next slide, Jen. So this is what should match what's in your handout. This is the CDTC allocation. Basically, it amounts to roughly almost 64% of the whole total of Region 1 for these core programs are allocated to CDTC. So, if you think about a 60-20-20 split between the 2 rural counties, AGFTC and here, we're actually doing a little better in the allocations. So that brings the funding available to program here to $378 million over the 5-year program. So about $75 million a year on average. That also, just as another fact, go to, it represents a 43, almost a $44 million increase over the 2019 5-year tip. So 13% increase over the 2019 tip. But remember, the whole bipartisan infrastructure law increased funding statewide by 52%. So just for context. Next slide, Jeff. So at our previous meetings, you folks worked through the status of all of the existing projects on the current 2019 transportation improvement program that are not yet completed. The funding has not yet been obligated, that are going to roll into the new tip. That's $86 million worth of projects in these core funding programs. It's about double of what we had 3 years ago when we updated the 2019 tip. So it's a much more significant roll in than we've had in the past. We just, for the illustration purposes, spread the funds based on our knowledge right now between years 1 and year 2. We'll do a rebalancing act, if you will, throughout this process by year. But I just wanted to give you the context of roughly.
Those are
what's
already
available.
approved.
These were
projects
previously
rolling
approved
into the
by the
future.
body,
Okay.
yep. So these are, we're just showing you the impact on the allocation. So next slide, Jen.
Sandy, quick question.
Yep.
So this is double the last time we were in the same position.
Yep.
Is the reason for that just those projects didn't progress?
I'll get into that. I have, yeah, there's a couple of factors that led to that. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with $292 million by fund source. Now, the thing to pay attention to is the total by fund source. So we have about $215 million to program in the National Highway Performance Program. That flexible fund source, the one I said at the beginning, is the most valued and has the most widespread eligibilities. We have only $21 million to program in that over 5 years after the roll-in. The STP Urban increased with the bipartisan infrastructure law. Thank you, federal government. So we actually have almost $39 million to program in that STP Urban fund source. The Highway Safety Improvement Program also increased in the bipartisan infrastructure law, so about $17 million. The STP off-system bridge is showing here as a negative, but truthfully, it's net zero. We're not going to be having any allocation of STP off-system bridge in this program. So that's, you can view that as a net zero. But that leaves us, the bulk of the funds are going to be in the NHPP fund source. Next slide. So to compare, before the roll-in, 2019 versus the 2022 tip updates, we had an increase in the planning target of 13% all in. You see by fund source, even between 2019 and 2022, we have an increase in the NHPP, a decrease in the flex allocation, an increase in the urban due to the new formula, and an increase in the STP, the HSIP, the safety funds. So the net is 13%, but it varies by fund source. After the roll-in, you'll see that negative for STP flex increased quite a bit. The STP urban basically zeroed out. The NHPP is down about 6%, and we still have safety money available. But all in, when you compare 2019's tip to the 2022 planning targets, after the roll-in, what we have left to program is only 3% higher than what we had in 2019. Remembering that the state of New York got 52% increase statewide in all fund sources. That's just the reality. Those are the facts. Next slide. So why? So coming to Ross's question on some of the reasons for this, the state, as we said at the beginning, there's these 4 very large projects that are taking more money off the top. We do want to point out, though, that as part of the state budget process, there's a possible increase in state funds that may be going to local governments via whether it's the CHIPS program or an increase in the state touring route program or even a new Paved New York program. So there may be other resources coming from local projects from the state and the state budget. until we see the state budget, we don't know the specifics. So that might be the sort of compromise, if you will, by the state taking the federal funds off the top for these very large projects. The larger roll-in impacts, inflation and cost increases. Anybody who's been working in the business knows the cost of things has really increased. COVID-19 not only affected cost, materials, and schedules, a lot of things got delayed because of COVID-19. And then material availability has been a real problem during this last year or so. So that all of those things have definitely impacted the roll-in of new projects, of the existing projects. And as I said at the beginning, you know, there's still a lot of programs that aren't allocated here to CDTC that we're not sure how these are going to be handled by the state yet. We don't know the impact of even the transportation alternatives program and what projects might get funded there. So there could be more projects coming from other resources, but in terms of our core 3 primary fund sources that we program here at the table, it's about a 3% increase, which is really the change in inflation from 20. So think of it as flat. Now,
All that.
so all of that was just, you know, I just wanted to give everyone the full picture of how we got to where we are. Next slide, Jen. In terms of what is on the table, we haven't even addressed yet what we're calling multi-site projects. We usually use the language set-asides. We're going to change that language a little bit to be multi-site projects and programs. So the help truck program, the TNC, I would consider more of a program than a site-specific, a multi-site project. But you know, we're going to come up with some different ways to describe these blocks of funds that we set aside for certain types of multi-site projects and programs. And we had the solicitation, which resulted in 91 applications for funding, and the dollar value ask of all of those applications was over $432 million. And remembering, we only have $292 million to program in those 4 programs. So there's a lot of ask, a lot of need, but not as much money as I think we were all hoping, including myself. I think that the way the infrastructure bill was being portrayed in the public realm and in the media made it sound like to all of us that there would be a lot of resources for a lot of local projects, certainly within our region, and that's may or may not play out that way. There's several things, as Bob mentioned, we don't know yet the impacts, what's in the state budget. If the Livingston Avenue Bridge is in the state budget as a priority, then that's a big win for CDTC. That's been a 20-30 year long priority in our long range plan, that we wanted that bridge reconstructed with a bike ped element. And if that gets funded, that's a huge win for us. But in terms of these core formula programs that we program right here at this table, this is where we're at. Next slide, Jen. So before we do need action on 2 things today. The first is acceptance of the proposed regional target for CDTC. That was the one that was in your packet, the 378 million net total. We need your approval on that. So we do need a motion to accept the planning target as the starting point for the transportation improvement program update.
All these targets are work for you, right, Bob? I mean, this is how the targets are created between CDTC and DOT.
This is the guidance that come out from DOT, so to all of the MPOs.
Right.
So what is the rationale for the even distribution rather than front loading?
We always have to evenly distribute it for the purposes of fiscal constraint.
I mean, you're guessing what appropriation bills will be in any given year right there. So every one of the, because again, right now, all we have is a bill. We have an authorization, a piece of law that says we're going to do this and there's so much money in each given year. But it's really the appropriations in any given year. And like Greg did a nice presentation last time, there are balances with that based on what the obligation authority is, and then August redistribution, and these just sort of become targets, and these are the numbers that come out of the legislation itself.
I mean, out of Washington, the first year doesn't even have actual money behind it yet, you know,
Right.
but these are what the highway bill set up that should happen, and generally they happen. Or, you know, generally.
So these are just, I mean, these are for planning purposes. They're around the table. I mean, things, based on deliverability and stuff. I mean, like the chart we show earlier, we like to stay within the 5% and ever just try to keep our checkbooks balanced. But, you know, for the very first cut on the bill, this is where that comes from.
Right.
Planning versus reality.
So is there any opportunity for offset on the STP off system that's zeroed out with this plan? I mean, that's.
So here, I'd like to say a few things. That the off system being zero is a product of a few things. One is it's been oversubscribed to in the region, so we kind of overspent that. But the FAST Act, and this is continued through the new act, is flex and urban can be used on off system bridges. So that doesn't mean we can't program an off system bridge. It just means we have to utilize one of those other fund sources. And in region one, we're in the 8 counties, we have to do this too, because the off system programming is very low and you barely get after a bridge a year. It's not. Anyway, so we're using other funds to fund that.
So the flexibility for off is still there. Got it. Thank you. That's important to know. Thank you very much. So is there a motion? Any further discussion?
I'll move with Steve.
Steve? Thank you. Second by?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. We're ready to vote. Everyone's comfortable. It's the best plan we can move forward with. Good, excellent presentation overview. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed to the plan? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, Jen. So we need a second action to accept the roll-in and how that reduces the allocation to the 292 million over the 5-year period. So again, it's a motion to approve the roll-in balance. Bob and Russ.
So in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? Hearing none, move forward to discussion items.
Yep, and one final slide. Go ahead, Jen. So next steps and where we're going from here. We're all waiting on the New York State budget to pass. That will allow the department to start actively, even though we solicited for and prioritize the state's projects until the state budget is resolved. We couldn't share with you publicly anything more than what's available on our website at this point. So you'll see on the website all of the candidate projects, the evaluations, they're organized by project category and ranked by the total project score that was assigned by CDTC staff. So that information is all available to you there, as well as a fact sheet on every project. What we hope to do, and we're going to need an additional meeting of this body on April 20th to go through those multi-site block funded projects and programs, also known as the set-asides. We'll start the process of funding the site-specific projects for both state and locals. And then to help guide that conversation, we're going to show you some funding options. As we talked about, the state has a preservation target we need to consider. We want to make sure the new visions priorities are considered. So we'll show you guys some options so that way you can think about and honor the scoring while also taking all of these other pieces into consideration. There could be some trade-offs in that discussion. Maybe a lower ranked project is traded off for a higher ranked one. You never know. We'll have to see how this all plays out. We also might find there's some surprises in that state budget where projects might be funded through the state budget process that we weren't aware of, or there's a TAP CMAQ announcement of funding. So there's a lot of unknowns and things are constantly changing here. So it's going to be a busy month and a half. If we need it, well, we will have our standard May 4th planning committee meeting either way. We're hoping to be at a place where we can approve the draft tip at that meeting to release for public review. If for some reason we're not, we may need another meeting in mid-May to finish things up and then start the public review process at that point. Either way, I'm going to propose that we reschedule our June policy board meeting and move it 2 weeks out to June 16th. It's just going to allow us more time to complete the public review process, make sure we're doing that adequately, make sure the air quality conformity determination is done in the appropriate public review process for that. Gives us time to respond to public comment and address anything that might come up. As I said, the state is, past practice has been that the state requires us to finish our tip update by July 1st. We have 2 extra weeks, so it's not due until July 15th. So I think it's wise for us to just give ourselves a cushion of time in case there's some challenging conversations or there's some surprises that come up as a result of the state budget passage. And I think that is all I had to say about the tip today. I know it's a lot, a lot of information. We'll post this presentation up on our website so that folks can have access to it and think about it. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Sandy, the Hsip funding source, because it's got specific screening tools, is that something that CDTC will screen projects that are currently listed for consideration to
Yeah.
determine whether they'll be eligible or not? for that
Yeah,
potentially?
we've been talking to DOT Region 1 about how to best position access the HSIP fund source. There's no doubt it's the most challenging fund source, and the biggest challenge is getting a collision diagram drawn. So we're going to try to come up with some options and solutions for that.
Obviously, if it's eligible, we would like to get it in that category.
Exactly.
But I think our to hold that as if you don't want to make a sponsor wait another tip cycle to then get it. So if we had this block and then something became eligible 6 months from now, a year from now, that any of this valley had a good project, that there would be an opportunity to bring it forward.
That's what I'm thinking when I look at the intersection improvement project list, there's reasons for all of them, and some of them might be elevated with the accident data for potentially funding.
And that's why we thought that was a good method. If we don't expend it all with eligible candidates the first go around, it will give us some options.
Are there criteria to meet that category? I mean, so many crashes or
It's a cost benefit primarily, which the cost is usually
Crash reduction.
right, in the amount of crash reduction. So yeah,
there isn't like, if you have this many crashes at this intersection, then it qualifies.
No, I'll take, for example, if you were proposing a road diet, right, a lane reduction project, and let's say you had certain crash types for which that solution would reduce that type of crash, that's what the HSIP, that's how the safety funds are sort of allocated. So we're looking for certain types of projects that have a good crash history, that have a pattern of crashes that can be resolved with the proposed project. So it's a more engineering, approach, I should say, than some of the other fund sources.
So one thing I do want to mention though, is that with the federal legislation, there is as you know, there's a new bridge formula program, which wasn't indicated in the, in the tables here. And that was actually an increase of, for this, for 2023, the one that we have here, actually 2022, it's about 300 and total was about $378 million that came to the state. That, my understanding is that is going to be interchangeable, with NHPP funds and some other bridge projects. So, as far as the off-system funding, just for that program alone, it was about $56 million, $57 million. So there's a lot of that funding that's available. my understanding also, if I got it right, is that the state is planning to announce like a Bridge New York's. So keep those projects, keep those projects in your mind as far as bridge projects, and availability is concerned.
The biggest concern I think we all have is, and Bob alluded to earlier, is application fatigue. Unfortunately, the way things are playing out, we thought and we're hopeful that the infrastructure law would allow more of the funding to be programmed here through the single application process. That's not how it's playing out. And so then it becomes a burden passed on to you folks to submit applications to a number of grant options. And it's a little more challenging to access the funding just from that resource perspective. We've heard that critique from many of you in the room, and I think we're starting to see even with some of those short timeframes for a couple of the discretionary programs, and like the RAISE program that's been announced so far, that the requirements and the benefit costs analysis, some of these things is beyond what many of you can do locally. So we're going to monitor that, and we'll be certainly giving the state and our federal highway partners feedback on how these things are going, and we'll see how they play out as the rules and the guidance continue to come out on how these additional funding programs are developed.
Just keeping track of all that. Yes.
So Jen, you can close this presentation. So one of the things that we are going to do is we are going to set up a infrastructure law page on our website that's going to have fact sheets, and we're going to try to connect to the federal highway bipartisan infrastructure law webpage and just make sure that we keep that up to date with information that you folks will be interested in. You'll see more and more stuff get forwarded from us as these funding opportunities open. Certainly as the state builds new programs, again, there's a few programs that the state will have to develop its own guidance for once the federal guidance comes out. So that may could be a year, it may take some time to do that. So this isn't the end. The challenge that we have at the table is the impact of what the state has opted to do with our core funding. And the core funding impact is there's really no new money here at the table of the program after the roll. So, take that for what it's worth. That's the reality of it.
I mean, I guess I would like to point out that in looking at the big picture where 4.2 of the 4.6 is slated for other things, there is a recognition to the region and then CDTC that the increase was 13% of available funds, even though the roll-in's bigger. Without getting into where else it didn't go, it came here, because that clearly could not be the trend in the other areas. So there is a recognition of the need here, and it outside of what the off the top went, this area did do well in the programming sub-allocations. So it did hold. I mean,
Could have been negative.
it
Well,
could have, right, it would be, we'd have less to program if we stayed perfectly flat, we'd have less available with the roller, so.
Exactly. And, going back to the Ron Epstein presentation at our policy board meeting back in December, he said right there, we want to manage expectations on this. And this is sort of what the end result is.
Using that 232 million as the programming target, has any consideration been given to the roll-in projects and the price escalation potential of those, and what that percentage would reduce the 232 by?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple factors, with materials pricing still going up, inflation still increasing. I was surprised that the guidance document has inflation figures that we're required to use, that they were still the same inflation figures from 3 years ago. I expected them to be higher. So I expected us to be bumping up all of the costs, even of the new project proposals, which is based on inflation alone. That didn't happen. I think that is a very real possibility that we need to think about and consider, as well as the cost estimates of the proposed projects. I know everybody does the best they can to give us a good number to program. But you all know that once you start designing these things and you get into the weeds and you find out little things here or there and, you know, costs go up, you know, and it's not because anybody was in any way negligent or trying to pull the wool. It's just a fundamental reality of going from planning to design to construction. But these are all factors that we'll have to think about.
You know, and I think there's a conscious decision to do that. Andrew. I think the body here has always worked collaboratively for when a project gets close to the finish line or a design approval, whatever the new benchmark is, the cost for that project. If we went and just added 10% to every project cost with the roll-in or something to get started, it further, handcuffs us in what is essentially a planning sort of effort here. It's not the accounting yet. And and that's certainly open for discussion if it wanted to be handled differently, but we've sort of, as projects hit the next milestone, that it's refined. And if who knows where, oil prices are going to be come October when, we're actually into this pot of money.
I think asphalt estimation right now is like $15 a ton.
It is.
And then if you include the fuel on top of that, it's another $350.
Joe, that may be our discussion, and, we kicked that project. I mean, we're having that problem in house right now. There's probably some paving jobs that aren't going to go.
Yeah.
So it's not worth it to put it out there for that money. And you may want to see, all right, where are we at later in the season to do something like that, particularly with the pavement stuff. If something can be deferred because you just don't want to spend that kind of money.
Sam, did we leave money on the table then with the roll? I mean, the project on the tips, right? They were fiscally constrained. We had the money. By rolling it over, we didn't roll over any money with it. So did we actually leave half that $30 million on the table due to some of the complications that you said?
Well,
Go ahead.
no, if you spent it, the first year's budget would have gone down because we would have had a negative financial balance on the way in. So if you spent it, it's a wash, basically. And so if you have a lower roll-in, you have a lower first-year number because we would have overspent.
I think what he's driving at though is, did we leave federal funding in the 2019-2024 TIP because those projects were progressed?
The money wasn't taken away.
There you go.
The money didn't leave the region. It's still here.
It's still.
All right, because that's what it almost sounds like when we're talking about it, is that it's, well, we're rolling in twice as much, so now we can do less. But that's the thing, it doesn't appear that we're actually doing less. It just appears that it doesn't sound like we lost any money. The other thing, did staff put together a breakdown of all these projects, the 91, between NHPP eligible and non-NHPP eligible?
Yep, we have that for internal and we'll share that with you guys at the next meeting. I think what we've been talking about, depending on how things play out here with the state budget, of course, because there's still, things can change. We're gonna try to program fund source neutral. The reason being is that the region, these two folks, have some flexibility to swap fund sources, not only within region 1, but perhaps even statewide. So we're likely to program to the dollar rather than to the fund source when we get into that exercise.
And philosophically, we tried to program maximize NHPP for all the DOT candidates. So from a programming perspective, that's a good conversation. As we get into the individual candidates and say, well, something may be eligible, but then, okay, well, that DOT candidate could also be eligible for flex at the same time. We have the flexibility, except for the safety funds. It should be project driven up, and then we'll sort of make it fit into what category that we could sort of fit. But if we're to do it the other way,
it's really tricky. The long and the short is NHPP flexibility was also increased in the FAST Act, and that continued forward too. So NHPP funds can be used on any federal aid bridge. So that flexibility means that very easily we have way more likely program projects. And just looking at the list, no matter how you slice it, we're going to have way more eligible for NHPP than NHPP available. So somewhere in the programming, we're going to program something NHPP eligible with a flexible fund source, with urban or flex. So that's why we can program fund source blind. And we very intentionally also are trying to reduce the DOT subscription to flex and urban for that, also to add flexibility to the process. So does that make sense?
Sure. I just know that NHPP historically has always been the hardest to give out. DOT is the biggest consumer of NHPP money, and that's what we have. So then if it comes down to the locals, you know, I just, the numbers are the numbers, but when, you know, if it comes down to it, this table is actually going for 20 million. You know, I want, you know, what the actual number that we can actually go for what we're talking about is these, you know, new visions projects. You know what I mean? I have a bike path project out there. I'm sure there's Zim Smith. I'm sure there's all these little niche projects on there. And it's like, they're all going to be fighting for not 295 million, for like 90 million or 50 million. And that's where, you know, you're really going to see the banter.
And that's why we wanted to provide some funding options. You know, those of you who were here 3 years ago, it was a challenging conversation. And we don't want to go down that path again. We want this to be collaborative and coordinated and just constructive. So, you know, we'll try to provide you guys some guidance and some things to think about up front. We have to, again, consider the department's needs on the preservation target. But to your point, within whatever remains, you know, there's some ways we can balance the program through the different funding categories of project types and local needs. We got to think about geographic balance around the region. You know, there's other factors as well. So we're gonna try to strategize. We're just waiting on the state to do its job and get that budget passed so that we can start talking about this stuff in detail.
So Sandy, that's the one question I have to start the set aside discussion is the planning targets everything we just voted on due to this possibility of a change in the state budget in some way. Those may get adjusted.
Not likely. I would say pretty much what you just saw is what it's going to be. I think the unknown is whether there's any projects in the state budget that are specific to our region that might be coming to CDTC. Some of which may be
And that would
candidates for
just to
funding.
get
That
it
could nip off.
over with. Talk about our set aside. Or no?
It's your comfort level. I mean, I didn't feel, so Ross is asking if we wanted to address the CDTA set aside ask today. I felt like, you know, given where we're at, it wouldn't be fair to do that
Okay.
until we meet in mid-April.
Okay.
I'd rather have it done in context with everything else.
I mean, I think from where Greg's kind of going with this, it is definitely, and thank you, Sandy, and obviously Greg and Bob, for how you explain this, because now I understand, CDTA understands better of the relationship of STP Flex and NHPP. One thing I will say is what the group is going to like is what they see, which is going to be CDTA needing less STP Flex for the region. And so that was the only reason why I was like,
I'll move for that.
We should chat. We'll-
oh, it's
Next
okay.
meeting. We'll have
Yeah,
more
I would
facts.
like to move it forward, but if DOT has reservations.
Yeah, let's wait because there's some,
Context is key. We'll have more facts in the next meeting.
About color, not.
Not a set aside, it's a BRT question.
so please mark your calendars for April 20th at 9:30 a.m. We will reconvene. We will have the technology working, I promise.
The only thing I guess we might add to folks with large projects in the candidate list, I guess consider the idea of what a preliminary phase could do for you if you feel like it might not fit. you know, we don't know who, I mean, we have no clue what the funding scenarios we're gonna come up with are, but the larger asks, if they could benefit from a preliminary design only phase to get it up to a competitive spot.
If you're looking at, say, breaking down your total project cost and saying, can you allocate it somewhere or present just one part of 3?
Yeah, like, or, well, that phase it, or, you know, if you have a large project and say, you know, look at it, I'd like the whole thing, but hey, if I could get a $500,000 to get through NEPA, that would make you very competitive in everything else that's around, and another layer.
But that's not gonna come up in the sheets that are already done.
No,
Because I've got, I have a large trail project. Somebody says, can you break it into 2 phases, 3 phases or something?
No,
like
not
that?
phases like
Not
that. Like,
phases.
we're talking about getting design approval.
design for the whole thing.
If we could not fund construction out of the core funding, and it would make it a much stronger candidate for the discretionary programs that may be around this table, that we authorize X number of dollars for the design component.
All right.
Not breaking them. We don't want to go down the smaller project
I was gonna
things.
say, that'd be hard for
That's,
Sandy to categorize all this, yeah.
you lose some economy of the project
Mhm.
when you start doing that.
Bob, not to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna ask.
I like when he says that.
It's always a dangerous side.
I was a regional advocate at the Advocacy Day for some of the local settlement. And one of the topics that came up was Bridge New York awards. So the city of Schenectady put in for our Crane Street Bridge, a $4.5 million application for Crane Street. You know, we didn't do too well as a region this particular round. I know we did okay last time, but there was something that came out during that a bridge in New York got $25 million through the program, but the cap was 5.
That a particular candidate got 25? Yeah, not something we're aware of.
Okay.
Not. Is there a geography? Can you a hint on?
I mean, somewhere in New York, it's downstate, it was a downstate bridge. So,
Yeah.
I just didn't know, you know, that's what kind of one of the conversations that we had with them was, you know, we put in the application in good faith, you know, the region, I mean, that if actually somebody got in and got a bridge for 5 times the amount of the applicable money. I just didn't know if that was something that came up on your radar. I'll try to get some details, but I didn't know if this was you know, something that you had heard about.
No, I mean, frankly, the region isn't very involved in that other than the initial solicitations, but then the evaluations and the announcements were not.
Because, you know, it's what I'm saying, as Sandy has pointed out, and all that, they're taking money off of our table and they're putting it up at the big table. And so, you know, they send out the rules, and if you follow the rules, then the rules are, you know, up and down. I just didn't know how that would work.
Hey, Chris, this is Joe Semino here. I just have the list here. It was a New York City region. I don't know if has different rules. It was 29.4 million for a city Department of Transportation bridge, 5th Avenue over the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. And they didn't try to hide it. It's right on the list of all the other bridges that got awarded. So, but yeah, it's the only one of that region. It's New York City region.
Yeah, we can find out some more.
What I'm getting at is,
Program
I put a lot of
guidelines.
faith now into these damn programs, because this is how the business has to get done. You know, so I put it in the bridge and tap, and I fill out the applications and I put it in. And we purposely went and said, it's a $4.6 million project for preservation. We're gonna leave the abutments, take the broken bridge off. We could have replaced the whole thing for 6, right? So we didn't though, because that would be outside the program limits. But the benefit to the city would have been huge for the additional 1.5 million. So then, like I said, on these conversations, when it's like 29 million, I was like, oh my, you didn't even try to hit the 5. You just shot for, you know, what your need was. So that's where, you know, I'm just trying to figure out the rules to the game, what they are. And, you know, Schenectady can be just as political, maybe not as much as New York. But we can still try.
Yeah, so, you know, thank you for your patience on that lengthy presentation. We wanted to make sure you all had the context for the next steps. So we're going to move on to the discussion items on the agenda. So we can drop it to you.
Just
Yeah,
real
sure,
quick,
go ahead.
just in the discussion about the applications and putting together for not DOT is actually even including in the scope of our consultant work, the application development for discretionary programs. So whether folks are on the table or our friends on the phone, including application development within the scope of work for consultant requests, the RFPs or expressions of interest.
To calculate the BC ratio for these programs and everything else, but the use of a consultant is very helpful.
Usually is all we've seen, there is some sort of BC calculation involved. That's all.
Okay, excellent discussion. Moving on to agenda 5A, summary of the 2019 to 2024 TIP project selection moves. Jacob Beeman, the guidance, there's a handout at the table here. They've got the advanced.
Jang will hopefully show that on screen. for
I want to
us.
share it on screen.
There it
So
is.
again, this is a list of kind of the small cost increases and budget changes that we kind of make behind the scenes that don't require an official amendment. This month, we have 7, none that I have any particular, kind of more detail on, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has them.
Is there a summary highlight?
Well, I mean, really, we have 7. Again, this is really just kind of, these are kind of just administration changes that we made. Again, they don't require an amendment, but we started to show them for informational purposes. So it's usually cost increases less than 250,000 and schedule changes. So.
And that's just concurrence between DOT and staff. That's all it is.
Right.
This is just for transparency's sake.
Correct.
Here that
So we've always been making these changes, but I think since like November of last year, we started showing them.
I felt it was important again, because we're dealing with such narrow dollar values these days that, $250,000, if we did 4 of them, well, there's $1 million, right? So that's why we just want to track what's going on when this body is not taking a formal action. Just want to make sure you guys are fully understanding on what's going on behind the scenes.
So about 123,000, 3,000. So we're not to that quarter level yet. Okay.
Yep.
But
Very
like
good.
Sandy mentioned, I mean, if you have a handful of these, they can feed into
Penny up to the
this strength, so.
Any questions? It's information for discussion. And moving forward, item 5B is the CDTC project delivery update. Also, Jacob.
So as usual, we've got our project tracking spreadsheet that we've handed out and sent out actually, I don't think that goes out in the mail. But so this month, got a handful of updates from consultants. R195A, City of Troy, we had PS&E submitted back in February. So that's moving along. Town of Gilderland, tip number 8581, that's West Old State Road sidewalks. Letting was held in February. Town of Sand Lake Hamlet sidewalk enhancements. I think letting was held at the end of last year, but construction is expected to officially begin this spring. And A599 Village of Freed Island, Rose Avenue, Milledgeville, design approval was granted in January of 2022. As usual, be reaching out to 3 different sponsors next month: Town of Sand Lake, Town of Glenville, and Town of North Greenbush. So keep an eye out for that email from me if you're requesting those updates on your projects. And as usual, any sponsors or consultants are welcome to send me updates in the meantime. We take a look at that tracker sheet, and if there's any of the projects that look like you might not have up-to-date information, I'm happy to hear from you on that.
And we'll post the project tracker on our website following me. I apologize, it's not there right now.
Next item up is 5C, Charlie, DOT project delivery schedule update.
Yeah, as we're into in theory, the new state fiscal year, I mean, everything had been submitted from last year, 21, 22, and in terms of the state budget, and the issues that it calls around this table here, and in theory, our candidate projects aren't even really candidate projects until they have been approved. The program, which involves an MOU with the legislature. So I certainly recognize that we're part of the issue of formally bringing candidates before this group.
We don't blame these two. It's not their fault.
Noted. Any questions for DOT? We can do that in the next status of agencies. Anything further? We can move forward to the CDTC planning activity updates. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we have our running status table of all of our planning work. We're wrapping up a number of the technical assistance projects. As you know, we're just issuing a new technical assistance program solicitation. We're wrapping up one of our linkage studies, the Scotia Downtown Connections Plan. The public workshop was held on March 23rd, and they're going to develop a final report. We're also finalizing one of the Smart Communities Toolbox project is nearing completion as one of our regional initiatives. The New Visions Learning Series continues. We have a variety of webinar topics that we're hoping to assign, whether they're planning credits, AICP credits. We may even try to get some professional development credits for engineers for a few of them. So another opportunity to earn some credits. And we have a number of ongoing planning studies. And that's really it. You can read all the details on our website.
And we're done.
And Village of Boston Spa completed and adopted their most recent linkage study, the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. So congratulations on approving that. Moving forward.
Any questions for Sandy on
That's
planning update?
Hey, Sandy, I would support, I was talking with Steve Feeney about it.
Yep.
There was just FHW, like a 3-day webinar. What was that, Steve?
On the safety thing?
Yeah.
That was good.
And I wasn't able to attend it, but one of the things that I can't figure out with all of these things, because I know I've sat here and done some, I know FHWA, is the lack of PDHs.
Yep.
Like I've gone to essentially sales pitches for an hour and got one PDH. And then when you sit on these 8-hour, really great, productive,
Yep.
Design things, and I can claim nothing from it,
Right.
So I'm just, it goes back and forth. So Steve said they actually have a self-reporting way for planning where they can actually take credits for some of them, but
Yep.
if we could figure out a way to, I don't know, fill out that form,
Report. Yeah.
even get half credit for it, because an 8-hour seminar, half is 4 PDHs. Well, I would love that, and kind of put that little bit more on it for entice to go.
Yeah, we're definitely going to try to find ways to get the PDH credit. So we'll talk after.
Even the slides that they had there were just good as demonstration type stuff.
Great.
Moving forward, status of regional and local planning is up next. First is Regional Planning Commission. Mark?
Thanks, Steve. The full decennial census release for the 2020 census has not been released yet, so just giving you an update. But the one-year ACS was released, and that revealed that the capital region was one of only 2 in upstate New York with a growing population. The capital region was New York's leader in annual net domestic movers. That's into the region. Saratoga County saw New York's second biggest gain in annual net domestic movers. Congratulations, Saratoga County, and here's to sprawl. We have upcoming our spring workshop series or webinar series starting in May. May the 4th is starting. May the 4th be with you, and that'll include weekly webinars throughout the month and into early June. CDRPC and Upstate APA are partners with the Northeast Creative Placemaking Workshop that's happening, or Summit, I should say, that's happening in the city of Schenectady, April 18th through the 20th. I encourage you to check that out. You can Google Creative Placemaking Workshop or cpccommunities.org. If you want a 20% discount, use the code WG20 to get a 20% discount on that. The Northern Border Regional Commission, of which the CDRPC is a local development district, announced their annual state economic and infrastructure investment program. Up to $1 million is available for infrastructure projects, transportation infrastructure, general public infrastructure, anything that you can put in the bucket generally of infrastructure is available for $1 million. Non-infrastructure projects are eligible for up to $350,000, including healthcare, tourism, and other sort of non-infrastructure projects. Please keep your eyes and ears open for an announcement during, I guess, Earth Week, around Earth Day, for CDRPC's rollout of the Climate Smart Communities Program and our outreach coordinators. And finally, we've announced the dates for our Future Leaders in Planning program, and that's a program to connect college-bound high school seniors to the professions related to planning, engineering, sustainability, while they're in their sort of high school curriculum. It's an experiential program. The dates for the program are August 8th through the 12th. We're pleased to partner with CDTC. CDTA is providing transportation. University of Albany is providing meeting space. The group will use the new E-Tech building there as their home base, and we're looking forward to taking them out into the region to see what it means to actually do work in this sort of field. So hopefully we'll have more to report on that after that happens this year. Thanks.
Come on, thanks, Mark. Any questions on the regional front? Next up is CDTA. Ross?
On the BRT expansion study, we're in the process of selecting a consultant. We hope to name one approval at our May board meeting. We have an RFP out on the street for roadway and intersection design, part of the red line in the city of Schenectady. We pushed out the due date of that a month. So if any firms are hearing this or know or would like to apply, go to cdta.org. And then lastly, ridership continues to inch upward. We are approaching, we're over the 70% mark of what we were pre-pandemic, which is fantastic, especially when you compare it to the rest of the country, which is at roughly 55%. So not surprisingly, where the ridership is coming back is on the BRT corridors, just really proving the fact that you make the investment in improving transit service in the way that BRT does. We're seeing the results, especially on the blue line, which is right now our fastest growing route in our entire system.
Is that north south? That's the river line.
That's the yeah. Blue line is the Hudson River BRT.
Great, thank you, Ross. Any questions on the CTA front? Seeing none. Next up is DOT.
It's in the list of studies, and it's the 378 over the Hudson. We're still finalizing our consultant contract. Hopefully this month we'll get underway with that project. We are working with main office. There's the subject of the tribal communities engagement and sort of more formalizing our practices and engagement with those communities, working with main office. And I know this body will know something, will have something here to share at some point, policy change for the NPO. We're currently the 5310 and 5311 solicitations are out now for both the not-for-profit, the urban and the rural operators. I wanted, Kelly has been here before, or at least on a phone, we've seen it sort of join us and more on the program side. So you'll be seeing her around the table. In our local programs group, I did Alex Poland right there, the engineer that joined us, and affectionately known as the good Lorenzo. Lorenzo Cuneo right there. So hopefully you're seeing that.
Where'd the other one go?
You have some dentist work done this morning. That's all.
Any questions for DOT? Last chance. Okay. Thruway Authority is not present. Let's see. County Airport Authority, that would be yours truly. All right, we're on a plateau at the airport, seeing about 3,500 departing passengers a day, where we like to see closer to 5,000 pre-pandemic world. So we're roughly 80% of passenger traffic. Freight is still healthy. On the capital side, we still have scheduled operations requiring a lot of asphalt. We're out to bid for what we thought would be about $4.5 million. It's going to turn into $8 million due to inflation. So everything's running double what estimates are, but we open bids in about 7 days. Got all the GC. We're glad to share information on current asphalt bid. Have numbers from the 7 heavy hitters open bids. We've got a lot of applications out, and we're holding our breath on major terminal security checkpoint expansion, air traffic control tower reconstruction. A lot of pavement rehab is necessary. As we know, the asphalt only lasts about a decade or so. We might even switch to concrete, see if that is a better benefit over cost.
Dollar cost averaging, it's in the ballpark.
Right.
It's worth looking at.
Anyway, so that's my quick airport overview. Thanks for flying Albany. Any questions?
Yeah, the boss and I flew in and out last week and the lots were full,
Yes.
so that's a good thing.
So yes, spring break, the break periods are annual peak periods. So you're seeing a peak period now. We've got plenty of room in the garages. We're up to 32 electric vehicle stations free of charge, separate from your daily fee, and we're the lowest in the state for airport fees. Thanks for flying Albany once again. Let's see, Port of Albany's next, Pat.
I'm next.
Yeah, maybe.
So supply chain is what we talked about a lot, at least in our office. Albany in general and the port specifically are a benefactor of supply chain issues because ships that can't get into New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia have been coming to us. We never close. Coast Guard keeps the river open to just above the Slater. So we are on track for increased shipping, especially with the winter. I think we've had, I haven't seen this month, but it seems like we're getting to ship every other week. So that would put us at around 10 ships so far this year. And we're not a big voice. We're not getting a ship every 2 days. But generally we get in the winter a ship or 2 a month, and we get 3 or 4 a month. Right now, a lot of steel shipments that can't go other places have been coming up to us. So much that Steve told me yesterday we're pretty much full. And their biggest issue, which we have not heard, which unfortunately is now hitting us, is workforce. It is not; they do not have enough experienced workers that can do. If they're very experienced to use a 300-ton crane, but fork trucks and moving supplies. It takes some training. We don't have it, so we're going to be looking into ways to help them develop that workforce in addition to the workforce that we're trying to help the county and city Northwest develop for the offshore wind manufacturing that's on our horizon, which is what most of us spend most of our day doing right now. On the 80-acre expansion, we have 2 RFPs out. Right now, one is for a construction owner's representative. We're going to try to hire a firm to help implement the roughly $400 million project because our staff is just too small to do it. So they'll be helping us out. At the same time, we are looking to hire a construction manager at risk. The way this project is going to work, the report itself cannot bond. So we went through the Bethlehem IDA. That process allows us to, instead of doing the normal 4 contractors in the risk law, do a single CM that will oversee everything. We're hoping that economies of scale and speed of schedule, that this is the best route. We still have a project that's in the traditional existing port, everybody knows, that's in the city. That'll go to the normal 4 contractor rigs process. And some of us in-house will be handling that. Tree cutting starts next week. Unfortunately, as probably Tony before me, I see the policy board meeting that continually just slam our heads against the agencies, state and federal, of just not helping. So the trees can't be cleared. They're going to sit there until some others get out of our way. And then we will start site clearing once we get the permits. as I always say, DOT's gonna tell you what that helps us regularly. Everybody's kind of, you know.
Is it the Indiana bat issue on the trees?
We got rid of all them. Including, sure, there isn't an eagle nest between us and Queens. I'm sure. Just kidding, of course. The bats, this will be good for the engineers in the room. Hopefully DEC's not listening. There's been a March 1st deadline for certain bats, Indiana being one of them. It had to have trees cut by then.
31st, March 31st.
We've been told that that's the guideline. That is extended for us. So it might be something that others in the room can use as ammunition in a future project. Might not always happen, but I always turn to this project and say that it has happened. And speaking of asphalts, and we're going to be doing a lot of asphalt work this year. I hope the price has gone, but steel is worse than asphalt through the roof. So we're trying an unconventional route on these buildings that aren't going to be built until next year, starting a pre-order, getting in the queue. So, you know, if the steel is going to be 150 million, we're allocating 5 or 10 or 20 million to get in the queue, lock in some prices and go, because it's not only price, it's they can't keep up with what's going out. So that's on everybody's mind this month. And hopefully it'll work along with that our next meeting. We're just trying to figure out ways to stay ahead, because just like everyone else, every project seems to be lagging because there just isn't enough material out there, or it's getting price prohibitive. So trying to figure out new ways. Thanks.
Good luck with it. Excellent overview. Any questions on the Marine Port? All right, our next meeting is in 2 weeks, 9:30 on the 20th. Sandy?
9:30 and the 20th, yep.
We've got April 7th, Regional Operations Safety Advisory, April 11th, Regional Transportation Coordination, RTCC, April 12th, Active Transportation Planning Advisory Committee, April 19th, New Vision Virtual Learning Series.
The webinars, yeah.
And I mentioned our meeting on 2 weeks, May 4th is still on. Yeah, Sandy?
Just our advisory committees are shifting to a hybrid meeting format, much like this. We'll get this to work. But you know, folks are welcome to come back here in person if they would like to participate. And the final note, we started our e-newsletter. We used to do a paper newsletter. We've shifted to an e-newsletter. So take a look at that, share it with your friends, subscribe, and that's it for today.
11:38, motion to adjourn.
You got it.
Second, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.